Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lisa Ryan, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Berkeley Executive Education. Along with me, I'll introduce a few of my colleagues in a moment, but on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you for joining us today for this webinar. You'll have an opportunity to not only learn more about the New Manager Bootcamp Live program, but also take away some very critical leadership insights from our faculty director. I'm looking very forward to that opportunity. And she'll also speak a bit about one of the very exciting things about this program, which is that it's happening in our new virtual classroom, the Forum. I want to thank you all for taking part today. If this is your first time with Berkeley Executive Education, welcome. We're happy to see you here. And if you are a returned participant, thank you for coming back. We love having a tight community and always like to see you in program and in our webinars. Let me say a few words about the team. First, you have on the board, Jen Bowie. Jen will be managing the live chat that's coming in through Zoom. So please, by all means, engage us throughout this session. It's very interactive. In addition, Jacqueline Ma is my other colleague who is managing any of the chats that come in through Top Chat and live streams. So again, please engage. We love to hear your thinking throughout. And now I'd like to introduce the speaker, and that is Dr. Homa Bahrami. Homa is a very renowned expert in organizational flexibility, team alignment, and leadership adaptability. Homa has written several books and is on many boards and is a senior lecturer at Haas Business School, as well as the faculty director of New Manager Bootcamp Live. Homa is a very close and dear partner to all of us in the organization, and it's always an honor to have the opportunity to hear her speak. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bahrami, and thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I know all of you, it's in the middle of the day. If you're in California, towards the end of the day, if you're on the East Coast, evening, if you're in Europe. So really appreciate you taking time to join us. As Lisa mentioned, today our goal is threefold. Number one, I want to share with you a little bit about the New Manager Bootcamp Live. Like many other organizations, we've reinvented many of our programs for virtual delivery in the new world, in the new situation we find ourselves in. I want to tell you a few leadership lessons that I'm learning based on the experience of leaders like you who are working remotely, who have to engage their teams remotely, who are juggling work-life, family balancing acts. And then, of course, most important of all, as Lisa mentioned, I'd love to hear from you. I know we don't have the opportunity, given the numbers on the webinar, to hear your voices, but please, please type in the chat box. Would love to hear your reflections, your comments, your experiences, any questions that you may have. So for those of you who don't know Berkeley, we celebrated our 151st birthday last year. We were founded in the 1860s, the first public university in the state of California, which came about not long after the founding of the state in 1848. We are the #1 public university in the United States and #4 in the global context, a fact we're very proud of, located just east of San Francisco, 20 minutes over the Bay Bridge. I'm at the Haas School of Business, as are my colleagues here today on the webinar, and Haas is the second oldest business school in the United States. We have a lot of alums. We're generally ranked in the top 10 around the world as a business school. We cover a variety of different degree programs and certificate programs, all the way from undergraduate to PhD. with three different types of MBAs: MBA for executives, evening weekend MBA, as well as our full-time MBA. One of the things I'm really, really proud of is our culture and our defining principles. And you see those in those slides here. We have 4 defining principles, which really determine how we teach, how we recruit, how we try to develop our students. Confidence without attitude. At the end of the day, we want our students to go out, whether they're attending an executive program or a degree program, confident to be able to do their work, but without arrogance. We want to challenge and question the status quo. In fact, as Lisa mentioned, my own research very much resonates with this notion of think about the future differently and challenge the status quo. A lot of my work is about flexibility, adaptability, reinvention. And of course, today in the COVID world, it's taken center stage, but I've always believed that the future is about creating teams, organizations, and leaders who can wear different hats, who can be spontaneous, who can improvise, who can deal with uncertainty effectively, and really think and act more like entrepreneurs. Students always, it's about lifelong learning. It's about that spirit of curiosity. And of course, as a public institution, we are very proud of the fact that what we do is not about us. It's about the community we serve, the stakeholders we're part of. It's about beyond ourselves. It's about giving back. So very proud of those. And I wanted to spend a few minutes just to put that in context, because that does inform you about the way we design our programs, the way we recruit our students, and the kind of executives, leaders, managers, students we want to develop. And by the way, just one thing we're very proud of, our MBA for executives was ranked #1 by The Economist this year. So something we're very proud of. So I would love to hear from you and learn a little bit more about your industry and location. I know we can't get into too much depth about what you actually do, but please type in the chat box what industry you represent: tech, biotech, consumer, financial services, education, and your location. That would just give me a little flavor of the backgrounds you have and where you're coming from.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start reading these as they come in. Welcome, everyone. We have healthcare, IT in New York, leadership coach, Dallas, Texas, tech, San Francisco, fintech, Atlanta, Georgia, tech, Boston, Massachusetts, government scientist, San Francisco, medical devices, South Bay Area, professional services, Cambridge, Cambridgeshire, UK,
Wow.
University of Toronto, Foundation, Redwood City, Tech, Santa Monica, California, Information Tech, India, Tech Consumer Goods, San Francisco, Mexico Logistics, Healthcare, San Leandro. Lots coming in. Thank you, everyone. Product, London, UK, nonprofit, Canada, financial services, Nigeria, social entrepreneur, New Jersey, production executive, LA, lab animal care, UC Berkeley, IT services, Mexico City, financial services risk, Phoenix, Arizona.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jacqueline.
So many,
Thank you all for typing in. I know there's plenty more coming, but I'm delighted we actually have also a global audience. Mexico, Nigeria, Canada, India, the UK. This is fantastic. It's always music to my ears when I see that we have a multicultural global community. And this is something, by the way, at Berkeley we're very proud of. We have a global student and executive body. So thank you very much for sharing that. I want to start by sharing with you this visual, which shows you 2 images. If you're calling by phone, the one image shows you a skyscraper, and a skyscraper, in my view, represents the world of yesterday, in the sense that there was relative calm and stability. And the other image that you see is the world of today and tomorrow. It shows a bunch of people in a raft. And why do I start by showing you this? Because we have said for a long time, dealing with change, uncertainty, being adaptable is a crucial leadership capability. But in today's world, it's taking on a different prominence. As I speak to leaders in different companies and different industries, one of the key messages I hear every day is our priorities shift every day. They shift every week, because we're dealing with a lot of unknowns, and every week unfolds new challenges. So one of the lessons I wanted to redesign the bootcamp is I want us to reinvent our skill set for new realities. And the key new reality is change as a constant. That the world of the future is about dealing with unpredictability and turning it into an advantage for yourself. So this is the sort of macro frame I wanted to get started with. And of course, many of you who come from tech, for example, you've lived with this all the time. There's nothing new here. Those of you from healthcare, you know, because of legislation and regulatory factors, as well as technology, you've gone through a lot of changes. But today, this is becoming a reality for every single industry. So with that, I would love to take your pulse, and here we have a poll for you. As you are leading in this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, what is your number one pain point? And here I've given you some choices. I've got to let go of my old habits, which is really hard, fear of the unknown, lack of motivation, creativity, relationship building, fluid, overload of priorities, too much to do, isolation, loneliness, and monotony, which is something we hear a lot about, lack of relevant resources, skills, and tools, homework priorities, particularly for those of you with families at home, or those you have to take care of in general, and you have to sort of juggle your work and your family commitments. So let's take a minute and see what the poll represents. If you could just type in 1, the number that corresponds.
Great, I went ahead and launched the poll. Give it a little bit for everyone to respond.
Find it very interesting. Nobody has pressed lack of resources, tools, and skills, which is very good news. And also there's very few who signed up for the first one, which is letting go of old habits and being stuck in my comfort zone. I find that very interesting. Okay, Jacqueline, you can tell us when you think everybody's.
Sure, it looks like we got most responses. So I'll go ahead and share the results.
Yes, so look at this. Fluid and overloaded priorities. And by the way, I've done this survey with a couple of other organizations. We haven't had as diverse a variety of participants as you, but this one has shown up as number 1 in at least 2 other sessions I've done this week with 2 very different global companies. So I find that very interesting that that gets the most votes. And then I think second, Jacqueline, we also have the, something about the fear of the unknown, which is plaguing all of us. And to some extent, the whole balancing act between work commitments and home commitments, and to some extent, lack of motivation. And creativity and trust building, by the way. This is the other thing that I hear. I was talking to a group that are in business development and sales the other day, and they were saying they're finding it really difficult to build relationships with their potential customers, which has to do with this issue of creativity, trust. So I find this result very, very interesting. Could we have some reflections and comments? I know you can't speak up, but I would love to hear some of your views about how, let's take the priority angle, how this is shaping up for you. Why did you pick that? Give us a little flavor of your experience. And as we go through the session, I would love to hear as many comments as we can. I want to make this as interactive as we possibly can, given the fact that I can't hear you. So please send your comments, and Jacqueline and Jen will monitor them and bring it to our attention. Okay, so with that, and Jacqueline, tell me if something keeps coming in, but I'm going to close this poll now and move on and tell you a little bit about the common questions that I get. Let me just see, can we pull that? These are some of the common questions that I get from people. How do I balance empathy with making sure that my team members deliver results? How do I prioritize? How do I stay connected? You can see some common themes here. How do I give effective feedback when I can't interact with my colleagues? How do I keep the same level of communication in the office, particularly around informal social conversations, water cooler conversations, having a coffee with someone, having lunch with someone? This notion of work and life balance. How do I communicate effectively to my team and make sure things are crystal clear, especially when everybody's distributed? And then the whole issue of work from home, the adjustments that you have to make, and how do I keep the same level of engagement over Zoom? And I have to say, this is hard. Keeping the same level of engagement when people are together and co-located is difficult. Those of you who have operated in virtual teams have had this experience for a long time, but of course this is a new reality for many people. So with that, I would love to share with you, I noticed yeah, there you go.
Homa, actually, is this a good time to share some of the comments?
Yeah, this is a great time to share. I'd love to hear what people are saying around those kind of nuances of the pain points.
Great, yeah. So we have, first one, as Deputy Director of a nonprofit organization, there are a lot of spinning plates that deserve my attention to help ED keep the whole machine running. Another comment, virus keeps changing the expectations we had on most areas, and it creates a lot of uncertainty for me, especially on the health side.
Yeah.
I'm utilizing ThinkBoard to organize and balance action plan for both work and private. Another comment, as a leadership coach, many people need support, don't always have the bandwidth to provide it. Too many requests for meetings, contacts, cold calls, not always sure who to say yes, maybe, or no. And one final comment, for leaders who are interactive in nature, it's hard to do all via online.
Yeah, and this is a really great segue, because you mentioned for people who are more sort of, prefer the personal touch. These are some of the most common challenges that I'm seeing today. Engagement, logistics, and structure. So digging deeper into each of these. So let's take engagement. Obviously, lack of informal interaction and water cooler conversations. Individual differences. We're finding a huge difference between those who actually really like working from home. And they say, I'm very good at disciplining myself. I'm very good at managing my own calendar, segmenting my day, making sure this time is for thinking work, this time is for interaction with others, and so on. And those who really prefer to be in the office, have interaction with others, have disciplined guidance, step-by-step approaches. So I'm sure as many of you are thinking about your teams, you're seeing these differences yourselves. And then of course, lack of focus, constantly interrupted, disrupted. I was talking to a colleague the other day who has a young child, and her 3-year-old was jumping up and down on her lap while she was conducting a pretty important meeting. So how do you deal with issues like that? So these are some of the common challenges that I see. Logistics, coordination and alignment, particularly if you're working on teams where there's a lot of interdependencies. So I can't get my work done without you completing your piece of the action. Tech tools and infrastructure, what kind of tools and infrastructure do you have at home? And perhaps you don't. And if you don't, what kind of a problem does that pose? And of course, something we've dealt with for a long time in remote and distributed teams, which is the whole issue around time zone. I was speaking to a leader the other day who has a very distributed global team and was saying to me that there is only 1 hour in the day that he can get his entire team together, based on the locations that they happen to be. And that happens to be between 1 and 2 p.m. Eastern time. So he said, that's my only window to make sure that everybody can come together and be aligned, because they're in such different locations with such different time zones. The one that I really want to bring your attention to is this third theme of structure. When you physically go to an office, there is obviously a clear structure for you, a physical structure. You have your office environment. You also have buffers. For example, commute time from home to work. You get your head around something and you start thinking about it. When you wake up in the morning and everything is happening for you at home, there are no buffers. There is no segmentation between when does my private life begin and my end and my work life begins. So lack of those buffers also makes a very big difference. Lack of routine and clear boundaries. That's why we think as leaders, you have to give very clear expectations to your team members. You have to be very clear about your non-negotiables. You have to be clear about the must-do elements of your weekly calendar. There is a great deal of opportunity for misinterpretation. You might say something over Zoom that somebody may interpret in a very different way. You might have a facial expression that comes across in a way that you didn't intend. Limited opportunities for mentorship. And of course, a lot about isolation and loneliness. As human beings, we are social animals. And even those of us who may be introverted, we kind of feed off each other's creativity. And I think that is obviously much more challenging when you're remote. So these are the most common challenges that I'm seeing as I'm looking at people and leaders trying to deal with the challenges of remote work today. And again, please type in some of your experiences and comments. I would love to learn from you as much as we possibly can. So what do we do about it? This is a quick checklist that I put together based on some of the lessons that I have learned by talking to various leaders in different industries and trying to sort of really synthesize and summarize some best practices. I'm going to start with the calendar, because when you're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, you've got to balance it with some predictability. So as a team member, if I know that one team member was telling me that I know that every Monday and every Friday, we have our regular team meetings. And on Tuesday, Thursdays, I have my one-on-ones with my leader. Those are set in stone and I can plan my week around it. So predictability when you have so much uncertainty going on is a huge plus. Team rules. What are some ground rules that you and your team have put in place to interact remotely? For example, one team that I was speaking to, a product leader in a big software company, was telling me that every Friday she has an open forum. An open forum is sort of really unstructured time for team members to come together to socialize, to talk about what's happening for them at home, to talk about their children, their dog, some new dishes they might have cooked this week, something that brings in a social dimension. And she suggested, this leader suggested, that this was a suggestion that she got from her team members. So you put together some simple rules that you want to put in place, but be inclusive, involve your team. I think that is really important. Don't put it on yourself as a leader to come up with all the ideas. Now, one of the things that's really different about working in an office and working from home is in the office, activities matter. So you go to this meeting, you have lunch with somebody, you have coffee with somebody. It's not only about your deliverables. It's also about your relationships. When you are working remotely, deliverables take center stage. This has always been the case for certain professions. For example, if you think of sales, you've always had your quotas. If you think about software developers, you've always had, the deadlines and the lines of code you've had to produce. But for many others, there has been this balancing act. But we find remote work makes deliverables center stage. So you have to set clear expectations about what people have to deliver. Meetings. One of my favorite tips and suggestions is to rotate the facilitation, the moderation of your virtual meetings amongst the team, and don't take it all onto yourself. We find this creates a peer-to-peer environment. This creates a spirit of community. It taps into diverse perspectives. It enables everyone to play a lead role from time to time. And it shouldn't just be the leader in a parent-child mode who leads every single meeting. Focus sprints. There's a lot of distractions that we're dealing with today. So it is really important for you to put some time on your calendar that you do real thinking work. I'm suggesting this, but unfortunately for me, this ends up happening at the weekend when I don't have any meetings or webinars and I can really focus on doing thinking work, creative work, whatever it is that requires a lot of focused attention. But to the extent you can, I really suggest you allocate an hour or two every day. When it's your best time of the day. If you're a morning person, your morning time. If you're an evening person, your evening time. That you just don't check your email, you don't check text, you put your phone away, and you just think and do creative work. We've talked about tech infrastructure. This is, of course, something that varies from company to company, from individual to individual. But, I'm a huge believer in simple tools and not complicated tools because, again, people are in different locations. They have different access points to different infrastructure tools. So you have to really keep that simplicity in mind. And, of course, finally, last but most important, when you're working remotely, you have to communicate much more often and you have to empathize. We find one of the biggest differences between leadership yesterday and leadership today is people are getting to know their colleagues, their team members on a much more human level. Somebody was telling me that, even the CEO works for a big one of my former students works for a big software company. And she was saying that, the CEO shows up on Zoom just like everybody else. And the other day he showed up and his hair was cut by his wife. And he looked sort of different and he looked just like a human being. And he said, normally when we see him is in a town hall meeting, there's a big stage, there's a lot of people in the crowd. So I think there is something that really makes us much more human and we get to know each other as human beings rather than as just organizational colleagues. And regular communication, whether you have daily one-on-ones with your team members for just 10 minutes, or whether you have those social hours, or whether you help them bring their home life into the conversation and share with you some of their challenges. I think this is a real plus of today, and I really encourage you to tap into that because I think it creates much more of a community spirit. So Jacqueline, are we getting any comments or any reflections or questions as we're going along? Anything anybody's sharing with us?
Actually, yeah, a question just came in. Your thoughts on striking a balance between being empathetic, approachable, and being objective, authoritative?
I think that's a great, great question. I really suggest you make a very simple tip I can give you is make sure you use your one-on-ones with each team member in 2 parts. And you decide how much time to allocate to each part. But one part is about the person and the other part is about the task. So, you may want to have a one-on-one with you. How's it going for you? How's the family doing? How are you feeling about the situation? What are some of your biggest concerns? really much more on a personal level. And then I would shift gears and now say, let's shift over to work. How are you getting along with this project? How's the deadline coming along? Is there anything you need from me? Is there an area you're stuck with? I think having a very concrete forum, an opportunity to have a conversation with each team member, some on the personal side and some on the work side, makes a big difference. And by the way, don't spring a surprise on them. Tell them ahead of time that, look, the way I know we've done our one-on-ones this way, but the way I want to do our one-on-ones going forward is I want to structure it in this way, because obviously I want to tune into where you're at and what's working and not working for you. And on the other hand, I also want to make sure that we're on track as far as the task is concerned. So my simple tip is leverage your one-on-ones and set that expectation, and make sure that you adjust the time as needed. Don't overdo the personal thing and don't overdo the task thing. It's just like many other things. You need to have a balancing act. But the one-on-ones, in my view, are tools that you can really leverage to create that balance. Thank you for asking that question. I think that was hopefully something that a lot of others on the webinar can benefit from. Okay, so let's go to our second poll here. And here I would like to ask you, how have you changed as a leader to the experiences we've been having? So these are some of the common themes that I'm getting from many others. People say I've become more agile, more empathetic, just to the question we just had. Less demanding on my team because I recognize they've got young children and can't do as much as they did before. More decisive, which by the way goes with more agile. I'm less perfectionist. Somebody was telling me the other day, I've got to make decisions when I don't have the information and move on and iterate and course correct as I go along. More demanding on my team because we've got a lot to do. I'm doing more experiments and leverage baby steps and small wins. And many tell me that as a result of this, they've had an opportunity to reflect more on themselves and who they are and their own leadership style, and as a result are more self-aware. So let's see what we're getting from you.
And Homa, while those poll responses come in, do you mind if I read a question that came in?
No, please do. That's a great time to do that.
So how do you recommend working with managers who do not want to meet virtually very often and have one-on-ones? And what kinds of support do you recommend people requesting to receive feedback on work?
I think it's a great question. I would take the initiative and tell your manager, what would really help me is if you can give me weekly feedback on these 3 things, but be very specific. Don't just say, I need feedback. One of the things we're finding in a virtual setting is specificity counts. So you may want to say to your manager, first of all, acknowledge that your manager doesn't want to do this. I know that interacting virtually is not your favorite activity. But what would really help me do my job more effectively, if it once a week, we could just connect for 10 minutes and you could give me feedback on 2 things, what I should do more of and what I should do less of. So be specific. Or perhaps you can give me feedback on how I'm doing on this aspect of the project. So that is what I recommend you do. Take the initiative. Don't sit back and act like a passenger, act like a driver. Secondly, be empathetic. Acknowledge that they may not like to operate virtually. I understand this is not your favorite thing to do, but it would really help me if you could give me that. And number 3, make it easy for them. So don't say, I would value feedback. Say, I really want feedback on this part of the task, or I want feedback on what I should do less of. Give them something that they can get their heads around, because in today's world, we are all so distracted and we're operating on such a sort of low level of creativity. I speak for myself, that I think the more specific people can be, the more concrete they can get results and deliverables. But as I said, it's a mindset issue in my view. If you sit back and wait for your manager to take the initiative and they don't, then you start feeling like a victim. So don't stay in that zone forever. Take the initiative and think like a driver. but make sure you don't make it sort of, how can I say it, like a harsh demand. And don't please send an email. If you can say this on the phone, or you can say it in a Zoom call, or you can do it real time in a conversation, it is so much better than just sending an email. The one thing I'm learning today is we have so many tech tools available. We have Slack, we have email, we have Zoom, we have, different companies use different tools, Skype, Teams, et cetera, that you need to leverage the right tool for the right purpose. And for this question that you just asked, talking to your manager and having an ask, make sure you do it verbally and you do it in a way that they can react to it quickly. Thank you for sharing that. So let's have a look at our results. And Jacqueline, please interrupt me as they come through. So more self-aware, followed very narrowly by more empathetic, and then I think more agile. Those are our top three, which does not surprise me. And it's interesting, less demanding on my team and more demanding on my team. These are getting almost equal measure. Again, please send in your comments or any questions you may have on any of these things. But these are the more common themes that I'm hearing from the people I'm interacting with. So Jacqueline, please interrupt me as different comments come in. Okay, so I want us to move now to the new Manager Bootcamp Live. We have had our new Manager Bootcamp, which I designed and developed several years ago based on the recommendation of many of my former students. And it has been originally designed for scientists and engineers who become first-time people managers. So they've had no formal training on people management issues. And this was a 3-day course. We offered it 3 times a year. And, I was very proud of some of the impact that we were having on this community of new managers. But of course, because of COVID, we've had to move this to a virtual model. But one of the things I wanted to do is make sure we didn't just take what we did in the regular bootcamp and transfer it to online. So we've had to really rethink what is the real benefit that we can offer people who may be interested in taking the new Manager Bootcamp Live. And so instead of 3 days, this is going to be a 3-week learning journey. Now, what is the benefit of a 3-week learning journey? The benefit is you can get the content in micro bites, you can go and practice and do, and then a third component is you can come to our coaching session and be coached and deal with any questions you have, the challenges you face, applying the learning to your situation. So this gives you a sort of a macro framework for the way that we've redesigned the virtual learning journey. So there's, of course, pre-work that you have to think about. This gets you in the mood. This gets you ready for the content modules. And the pre-work involves, we have a couple of diagnostics that make it more personal for you and is tuned in to give you concrete feedback. I'll talk about that in a moment. There may be some reflection questions we want you to think about, or there may be readings. But the purpose of the pre-work is to kind of get you primed for the content sessions that come next. Then we have our core content modules led by our faculty, and we have a wonderful group of faculty and senior leaders from industry who are going to come and join us and share with you their perspective. So we want to blend together the best of both worlds, faculty, research-based ideas, frameworks, tools, and best practices from the front line, from senior leaders who've been there, done that. So this is very much what we want to do with our core content modules. And then the third step, which is really, really important, we've also designed coaching sessions, group coaching sessions where we come together and you have an opportunity to tell us what you did with the content. You have an opportunity to ask questions, to share your experience, to benefit from what other colleagues have done, to benefit from the faculty perspective. So it's a sort of a 3-step learning journey. And our goal here is not just to get you to reflect and learn, but most important of all, to practice, be coached, and ultimately through this 3-week learning journey to build community. And please send any questions you have to Jacqueline. I'd be happy to address them. So now let's tell you a little bit about the content. The content, the macro framework for this is the way we've found it useful to organize our bootcamp always, which is how you lead yourself, how you lead others and lead teams, and how you influence your stakeholders. The one thing we have done, which is different, is how do you do this in a virtual, crisis-driven context? And so let's give you a little flavor of what we cover in Leading Self. We have a brand new session, which is based on my own research on adaptive DNA. Adaptive DNA is about 5 different leadership capabilities that you need to succeed in a VUCA world. Agility, resilience, robustness, hedging, and versatility. You will get an assessment, a diagnostic that assesses you on these 5 different dimensions. So when you come to our session, you will not just learn about best practices related to each of these 5 components, but also where you fit in to that scheme of things. We also have a 360 leadership styles diagnostic, which is going to be led by my colleague, Professor Jenny Chapman, and it's going to be about 6 different ways that you lead others. And of course, we're going to focus quite a bit on how do you build rapport and connectivity in a virtual setting when you don't have those opportunities for informal interaction. Leading teams is a big part of our program, and here you're going to be exposed to a diagnostic that helps you assess the health of your team. Because one of the things that I've seen about teams, and I've spent a lot of my time advising teams, teaching teams, working with teams, is teams are human. They need regular checkup. There is no magic wand that says these are 5 things to do, and once you've done these 5, everything will be great. You've got to keep at it. So team health is a session that is going to expose you to different elements of team health and how you can use this checkup tool to assess the health of your team on a regular basis. We're going to be joined by a senior leader from Google who has spent more than 25 years working in different technology companies, most recently at Google. And she's going to share with you some very key tools that she has developed and she has used extensively to make herself an effective leader. And we're going to also have a very focused session with our colleague, Court Worthington, on productive conversations in virtual settings. Again, you will see that this virtual component builds into everything we do. Last, by no means least, it's about influencing. How do I influence people when I don't have the opportunity to meet them face to face? How do I map and segment my stakeholder community, be they the bosses, the peers, cross-functional team members, partners outside our organization, customers, vendors? So we want to give you some tools and some techniques for mapping, segmenting, and ultimately influencing your stakeholder ecosystem. And last, by no means, how do we communicate and interact effectively in virtual settings? So those are some of the key topics that we'll cover. And as I mentioned, we have a combination of senior leaders from industry as well as our own faculty who are going to share with you research-based tools and perspectives on many of these topics. For example, one of our invited leaders, Debbie Cohen, was the former Chief People Officer at Mozilla. Mozilla is the people who originally developed Firefox, for example. She was their first Chief People Officer, and she has since worked with a variety of different big and small companies. And it's incredibly valuable to tap into the perspective of someone like Debbie, who has seen challenges related to people issues in a global context in a variety of different organizations. So we have about 6 or 7 leaders who are going to join us throughout the week, the 3 weeks, and share with us their perspective. So this is a little bit about the content. And again, Jacqueline, please interrupt me if
Yes,
any questions come in.
Yes, I do have 2 questions that came in. First, a question if we'll be covering effective decision-making within teams in the program.
Absolutely. Effective decision-making is part of 2 of our sessions. One is the team checkup and the team health session that we're going to lead. And then the second one is around the team tools. And I'm really pleased you brought this in because I'm a big believer in diversity and inclusion. And I think we should practice diversity and inclusion by the way we make decisions. And I personally am going to take you through one of these sessions around the different stages of decision making involving teams. What are some process steps that you need to take? And ultimately, how do you resolve disagreements and different points of view and create a psychologically safe environment so that different voices can be heard? Absolutely. Great question. Thank you.
Sure. And then the next question is going back a few slides. Feedback is important for a learning organization. Many companies ask employees to rate managers and give non-anonymous feedback on manager performance. What advice do you have for rating and giving feedback to managers in ways that do not harm employees' careers?
You know, I have to give you my honest, and I'm not a believer in numbers for manager feedback. Rank something from 1 to 10 because it becomes very subjective. You don't understand people's assumptions as they put that number in. What I am a big believer in is feedback that is solution-oriented, constructive, and actionable. So what do I mean by that? If you turn around to me and say, Homa, we give you a rating of 3 on a scale of 1 to 10 because you're a lousy manager, this is going to put me on the defensive, right? People's self-esteem is impacted. Whereas if you say to me, Homa, let me tell you 3 things that you could do to be a much more effective manager. You could do more of X and less of Y. You could do more of A and less of B. Whatever it happens to be. Now, I'm willing to listen because every human being wants to improve and do better. But one of the problems that I have with some current feedback processes is that they put the individual receiving the feedback on the defensive. And when somebody is put on the defensive, they become closed, they're not open, they're not willing to listen, they're not willing to absorb. All their mind is on at the moment is to defend my position. So if you're going to focus on feedback, I really suggest you say, what can I do more of? What can I do less of? And if you want to put a question for the manager's feedback, just say, what can Homa Bahrami as your manager, what are 3 things she can do more of? And what are 3 things she can do less of? And that is just reframing it in a way that I'm just now open and willing to listen. So this is a much longer conversation, but I just wanted to give you a quick input because I think sometimes it really gets in the way of what we set out to do with feedback processes. Okay, Jacqueline?
Yes, one more. As a new manager in a new workplace, what are some of the strategies to implement to dissolve team conflicts?
The best way to dissolve team conflicts, in my view, is A, to differentiate between task conflict and relationship conflict. Task conflict is about disagreement about how the work should be done. Relationship conflict is when I attack you because I don't like your point of view. And we find task conflict is very healthy. Relationship conflict is very unhealthy. So 2 very quick suggestions. Number 1, start in your team, develop a ground rule where you allocate someone on a rotational basis to be the devil's advocate. So you make it okay for the devil's advocate who's playing that role this week or this month to challenge the majority opinion and to offer an alternative. This creates a culture where diversity of views can be heard and people don't feel frightened to challenge the boss's point of view. Now, it has to be an enlightened manager to do that, because you've got to be really open to different opinions. A second suggestion I have is to institute a ground rule in your team that whatever you argue for something, you have to argue against your own point of view. You know, in the UK, if you go to places like Oxford and Cambridge, there's a very rich history of debate. Debate means, let's say you have a topic. The topic might be written feedback is good for improvement. And somebody may argue for that and give you all the reasons why you should have feedback. And somebody may argue against that and give you all the reasons why you should not have written feedback, for example. But this, what we call pro-con debate, is a very useful tool to leverage and to make sure that people don't become too emotionally attached to their ideas, and they have a wide angle perspective on a problem. Experiment with it. So those are two techniques I offer, but make sure you differentiate between task conflict, which is very good. You want differences of opinion before you reach a conclusion. Relationship conflict, when people are personally attacked for the argument they bring forward, which is very unhealthy. Okay, so thank you for raising those. I also want to tell you a little bit about the different, so these are about the content, some of the content elements we're going to cover. I want to tell you about the different modalities that we're going to use. So we're going to use a combination of Zoom, which we call the lab, because it has more of a breakout group capability. So we'll leverage Zoom. But we also have got a brand new virtual classroom, which I'm delighted with, which we call the forum. And the forum looks something like that. As you can see the faces much bigger. The instructor can walk up to everybody. It is really trying to mimic the realities of a real classroom. And the instructor can engage with the participants on a more personal, intimate basis. We also have many of the other capabilities that, like polling, etc., chat, and all of the above. So this is going to be the second modality, and some of our sessions in the New Manager Bootcamp Live will be delivered via the forum. Some of them will be delivered via Zoom, and we also have a platform called Volute that we are leveraging, which is going to be about peer-to-peer learning. And one of the things, for example, you can do in Volute is you can set up your own learning lounge. Let's say Jacqueline wants to set up her own learning lounge as a participant in the bootcamp, and let's say she is very interested in performance management. She can set up her own forum and invite others in the bootcamp who are interested in this topic to join her and create a community around that. So those are the three different modalities that we hope will make the virtual learning experience more impactful, more varied, something a little different. Again, this gives you different visuals around the new virtual classroom, and some of the sort of screenshots that you can see. People can show up much bigger. You can walk up to them. You can engage with them. You can raise your hand. It's designed to mimic a little bit a regular classroom. Okay, so I know we're running out of time, and I wanted to end on something that I feel very, very strongly about. Human nature is incredibly resilient. We're going through a very difficult period of history. It's somewhat unprecedented, but as human beings, we have dealt with a lot of challenging issues in the past. We've had wars, we've had revolutions, we've had famines, we've had Black Death. We've had all kinds of different challenges. And when you look at history and you try to learn lessons from history, we find that one of the key drivers of success and resilience is your mindset, is your attitude. Do you see this new situation as an opportunity to learn, to grow? Do you see it as a threat? Obviously, all of us have some degree of anxiety, fear, and uncertainty. I don't want to make people feel that they've got to be delusionally optimistic. But I think there is something about the mood you generate as a manager, the enthusiasm you bring for your team, which can either take the energy out of the individuals or it can inject energy. So these are the three things that we find are really important for having an effective mindset during crisis times. Optimism, seeing this as an opportunity to improve, to develop new habits, to build new capabilities, to retool yourselves. Baby steps, small steps instead of thinking perfection. And of course, most important of all, curiosity. I always say, are you sponge or are you porcelain? Are you willing to learn, to absorb, to ask questions, to reflect on your daily experiences, to learn from colleagues? Or are you going to be a victim and think about the situation as something you can do nothing about? And I hope that all of you view this as a real opportunity for growth and reinvention and leverage your mindset to generate hope and enthusiasm for your teams and colleagues. So on that note, I would like to thank you very much for sharing, for coming, for asking great questions, for attending our webinar. And if you're interested in the new Manager Bootcamp Live, these are the dates. And wish you every success and stay safe and take care of yourself. And thank you very much for joining us. And it's back to you, Lisa, for our wrap up.
Yeah, just a few closing words. Thank you, Dr. Bahrami. That was incredible. And thank you all for attending. We will be sending out the recorded webinar to you. And for colleagues of yours who didn't have a chance to view it, please feel free to share. There are some really valuable insights that came out of the time together. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you in the new Manager Bootcamp program live and seeing you in other programs in the future as well as webinars. And thanks to the team here for all the help.
Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.